Okay.
Hello.
Hello.
Good afternoon, everyone. This week we've had a few really big headline items, some of which have been of more serious import than others, and some of which have, how should I put it, been more national than parochial. I mean, for example, our first biggest problem is Julius Malema. And it appears that he's been mostly taken care of by all accounts. He's lost his trial, and we await sentencing in January at a particularly auspicious date because he is likely, if he receives a custodial sentence, to be unable to contest the local general elections on behalf of his party. And what that would mean is that his party will now be without leadership for a while. He receives a custodial sentence for longer than 12 months. He will be barred from office of any kind. He'll lose his seat in parliament. And this means that the EFF is kind of up for grabs. And what I thought was very interesting was that there are a couple of commentators who have mentioned this opportunity either directly or obliquely, or at least signaled an intention to take advantage of it. And one of those was John Endres of the Institute of Race Relations. John Endres is very middle of the road, sort of, how should I put it, a rose-tinted liberal type thing. And he mentioned that in his hopes, some of the members of MK and EFF could, in coming years, be peeled off the DA. Now, I don't think that's particularly realistic. These constituencies do not overlap very much. I mean, the DA already has only 4% black support, 4% of black people's electoral support. And the likelihood that the more extreme defectors from the ANC will be crossing over to the Liberal DA seems to me misguided. But there is a more credible challenger, and that would be Gate McKenzie. Gate McKenzie made an interesting comment shortly after Malema's trial and said that he was his fellow sort of inmate kind of thing. I think the word he uses, bantiti.
Yes.
And he referred to it as a kind of alliance, and that there's a solidarity between those who are convicted of crimes, which it's hard to say exactly who he's signaling to, but I see a couple of overlapping interests in this regard. Number one of them being, of course, his ties to the 26 gang, which is well known. Whether or not they are ongoing and in what capacity is not something that is clear and concise public information, although rumors persist. What is interesting here is that what it could potentially be read at by all parties listening is that, yes, he is still going to be friendly to these elements, but number two, that he strikes a tone of anti-establishment resistance. This is particularly important because he recently pulled out of the Government of National Unity, becoming now one of the few opposition parties in South Africa. What precisely he wants to do in that position, what strategy he wishes to take South Africa in, is of mixed character. On the one hand, you can see there's some hardline conservative issues like the death penalty and Christian national education and things like that. But his disposition towards land redistribution and so on is more ambiguous. What is true, however, is that the EFF will certainly not be able to make it without their leadership. And they've lost most of Malema's deputies in the last year, which means that the organization is increasingly top-heavy. Decapitated now, and you could well see the organization shrink to an insignificant rump, unable to maintain its basic support. And most of this, I think, common sense would dictate will flow over to the MK party, which, well, it's chaotic at the moment, but in a sense, it's still in the early phases. And which way to read the constant leadership changes in the party is hard to say. My particular read on this matter is that there are two possibilities. Either Jacob Zuma is trying to kill any potential leadership that could second guess him while he's still alive, or he is cycling through those who may be incompetent in order to find one or two people who might be trustworthy, ideologically committed, and competent, which is a very difficult combination to arrive at in any political system at the level of national power competition. So it seems likely to me that both can also be true, and that the demands of loyalty and the demands of merit, at least in as far as the party's stated and believed strategy goes, might be in conflict. They might be problems that conflict with each other. And that's true of many parties, even sort of more law-abiding ones like Nigel Farage in the United Kingdom, who has unseated every challenger and every critical voice in his party to arrive at a bunch of yes men who pose no challenge to the establishment. But Zuma has a different problem in that he is a certain rival establishment that requires a very, very careful balance of allegiances in order to sustain its slim pathway into government power. But with the EFF's voter constituency behind him, he can very likely become the largest party in the country by 2029. Provided he's still drawing breath. If he passes away, which is most likely, I mean, the man's in his 80s, then we're looking at a situation in which the ANC is left without challengers of any serious kind. And the state becomes a strange two-sided uni-party who share governance position between the DA and the ANC, which has long been Helen Zilla's dream.
Yeah, I was talking to someone that works for Ipsos. I don't know his exact role. He's part of my gym, and now I was chatting to him about this, and his prediction is that we're going to stay in a continual state of GNU for the next foreseeable future. So that sort of grey in between, as South Africa is dying, dead, and something before that perhaps new thing gets born afterwards. The sort of in the middle phase of sort of GNU. So.
Oh, yeah, look, that's not particularly surprising. I mean, Prince Mashele continually refers to this process of transition to a new system. However, even he recognizes that there's going to be a particular kind of problem that we face. Without a consolidation of a core party bloc that has a consistent system of values and policies, there's nothing to hold it together. And aside from that, we have another problem, which is now we're seeing the ANC's rivals to the left or the right, depending on how you frame whatever MK is, you're seeing them fall apart. And I wrote an article when I first saw the state seriously pursue the VBS charges some time ago. And the issue there is that if these two go away, those voters have nowhere to go to.
Yeah, exactly. But they're still there.
Continue without me for just 30 seconds. I will be right back.
No, exactly. No, that's basically the thought, is that if these two parties do go away, then we've still got a large number of people that think in a particular way, particular voter blocks still in the country. So what are they going to do? Where are they going to be moving? Many of which we know do hold certain radical positions, such as views on land expropriation, and they're going to be out in the public, but they're not going to have a voice. And so where's that energy going to be channeled towards? That's basically the thinking.
Yes, for me, the main problem is that this constituency is not going away. And that big interview that Helen Zille did at Chatham House in 2012 very shortly after the Marikana massacre, is for me still the key insight in this area. What she saw after Marikana, when Malema turned on Jacob Zuma and his status in the party was now in question, is he said she said this. She said that constituency is real and it's not going anywhere. Now that was a very, I think, accurate insight, and it's not just down to the connections and the networks that were controlled by the former ANC Youth League that Julius Malema took with him when he left. I think it comes down also to a broader problem that we have, which is that radical policies remain popular. As Atlas, as that, I think they were called Atlas, that Brazilian company that did the polling.
Yes.
So they did the thing that they did over there is they asked a question in a form that no local poller ever does. So usually, when you get like the IRR or the Social Research Foundation or whoever, Victory Research, whatever, they go down to the people and they ask, which are the biggest problems in South Africa, and land reform comes way down. But that's kind of asking the wrong question, right? So when you ask people directly, do you support this policy, that policy, you get, I think it was 54% in support and 16% unsure for land reform, expropriation without compensation. And that number went down by, I think, 15 points when looking at expropriation with compensation. So EWC is more popular than compensated expropriation. And I think the same applies for Black economic empowerment and racial quotas and so on. The thing, I think the principle that's sort of being illustrated here is when you look at the top priorities that people have, and they talk about social inequality, unemployment, jobs, all of that. The big thing that they're getting to is that they see these as being consonant properties of the system. So that if you solve the land reform question, if you provide jobs to Black people first, that solves those other problems. And it just needs to be done more thoroughly in order to really work. So I mean, look, this is part of the problem, is like that thinking which links up these issues. That's kind of the problem, because changing people's like deeper perceptions of where jobs come from is a difficult task, especially since they associate certain arguments with certain political parties, ethnic groups, and so on. So those kind of intuitive associations of who is saying this and why and in whose interest, that changes what people are willing to accept, no matter how reasonable your arguments are. And I think that cuts in all directions.
No, sure. And like, if someone says, okay, unemployment is very high on my list, unemployment, crime, you then have to ask that person, okay, well, how do you see this issue solved? And this is where statistics for me runs a cropper. This is why polling for me I'm very cautious of, because there's that old saying, lies, damn lies, and statistics. You've got a lie, then you have a damn lie, then you have the stats.
But that's the thing about statistics, is that there are, the reason they can be used to lie is people don't think beyond the number.
Yes, exactly. And okay, so let's say 60% of the people say unemployment is the biggest problem. Well, then you need to say, how do you solve unemployment? Now you're going to get what people really think. Because I think the way to solve is going to be different to someone else. Someone else might think it's to expropriate. It's to continue the racial laws so that I get favored, so that I get a job because of my skin color. Whereas someone like me would say, no, it needs to be the competent person. You need to have innovation. Innovate. You need to have entrepreneurs. You need to cut policies, lots of them. You have to strip away a lot of policies to allow innovation. And it's through innovating that you solve unemployment. But how many people think it's innovation versus how many people in South Africa think it's expropriation? That for me
you don't even have to be that innovative. I mean, if we're being perfectly honest, we just have to make it easier for people to deploy their capital without having it sort of shaved off before it hits the ground. And it's a thing about it's really hard to do business here. It's really hard. So because of that sort of choked up business environment, it's difficult. Obstacles to foreign direct investment, obstacles to hiring talented personnel, obstacles to straightforward and what's the word, fair participation in public contracts. All of these things make it very difficult. So people who are bidding for public contracts know that they need to have an insider contact, they have to grease the wheels, and they can't take risks where they're not sure of the outcomes because you don't know whose toes you're treading on. And so there's like these clubs that you have to be a part of in order to really be able to get stuff done in South Africa. And it's a very, very tight-knit, closed system, very cliquey. And so, that makes things difficult as well.
No, sure.
Yeah.
No, so I think it's a great point. Coming back to your initial point around where are the EFF voter base going to go? It's going to be interesting to see. Coming back to John Endress's view is that if the DA become more like the ANC, if the DA become more like the EFF, well, then they could attract them. So it also depends where the DA are going to move, right? For example, if you go onto the DA Instagram feed for some of the university branches, you must see some.
Excuse me, I'll be back in just a moment. I'm sorry, I've got something that's been terribly distracting me in a minute. Hold on. You just continue.
No, it's very interesting to go look at what's happening at the universities with the various political movements and what they are saying to the students. And if you go look at, for example, the University of Cape Town, just because that's close to where I live, what the sort of messaging that you're seeing the DA society put out there, it's very much in line with, how should I put this, more socialist ideas. They talk a lot about free housing and the housing crisis and what's happening, and free education for students, and it's the sort of language that is very attractive for EFF voters. And so I would suspect that if the DA do continue to move in that direction, that perhaps they could take up some of the EFF vote. But then the DA, some would say, then would change and become a new animal altogether. Maybe that is their direction, but maybe they were moving in that direction anyway, and that's who they are. And it's kind of tricky to say. Yeah. I was thinking of jumping onto another news item.
Yes, please.
But now you're back. No, so we were talking about competence, and so then it just triggered it in my head. And I had told you about, and I did write a piece for the newspaper, which what watchers of this video can go take a look at. But it's what's happened in. So if you drive along Main Road and you pass Cork Bay, everyone knows Cork Bay, and just before you get to Fishhook, there's a small little area there called Clovelly. And it's not a town, it's a suburb, I suppose, but it's not very big. Now, between Clovelly and Fishhook is a very large vlei or wetland, and there's otters, and it's quite a beautiful place. You can walk, take your dogs and so forth, take your children. Now, people have been living in these areas for hundreds of years. There's obviously Piers Cave, where there are rock paintings that date back to the Khoi and San when they lived there, and then Simonstown itself was built up by the Dutch and Simon van der Stel or Simon van der Stel. And Fishhook itself has had people living there for hundreds of years, and there's a lot of Anglo and Dutch history there. Well, anyways, between these two areas, there was a bridge that crossed over this vlei, and it had been there for a long time. And then 20 years ago, so that was that in 2005, I matriculated in 2004, 5, they fixed the bridge. And there was quite a nice bridge that crossed, and people used to cross this bridge. And going across it, there was also a big fat pipe with electrical cables. It didn't look great, but it was fine. Well, in 2023, so that's 2 years ago now, the city of Cape Town decided it's a good idea to dredge the wetland. Now, if you know anything about dredging and engineering, you don't just go start dredging a wetland. You have to have experts. You have to have people that know what they are doing, because when you start moving sand and rocks, it destabilizes the whole area. Well, they started to dredge and they didn't know what they were doing because the bridge started to collapse. I'm not even joking. Uh, so the bridge starts to collapse. The pillars of the bridge start to collapse. And they obviously then stop that. And they've packed it now with all these sandbags, but the whole bridge is cracked. So people can't cross. So now they have to drive all the way down to the main road to cross. And you can go take a look at a picture on the site. Well, what's quite interesting, I started to dig around a little bit, and the city of Cape Town used this thing called the supply chain management to basically run these sorts of things. So they will get people to come in and do sorts of jobs. And baked into the system is transformation. And it's very clear. If you go take a look at the criteria or the beholding ideology, it's very clear. They literally talk about Black economic empowerment and equity. Yeah. We all know what equity means. So, yeah. And then I was then thinking about this piece by James Marburg. He did a piece in 2019, 6 years ago, on Politics Web, where he basically said very clearly, he said, if we pursue transformation, competent people are no longer going to be around. And so you're going to have problems. And so this whole bridge collapsed, and even still to this day, it's broken. And local councillors and environmental people have been going to the city and saying, what's going on? And no one in the city wants to take responsibility. That is the outcome. No one.
It's always someone else's problem.
It's them. So we're now at a point, 2025, the bridge has been broken for 2 years. And no one in the city of Cape Town DA want to own up. And we also see that what's really underpinning this thing is that competency is no longer, well, it's thinning out. It's thinning out in the system.
It's exactly. I mean, like this is part of a very broad problem. I mean, they had the same problem in Stellenbosch. Now, I mean, Stellenbosch, the DA doesn't really have control of the municipality at all, despite having a majority in the council. The municipal manager and the former mayor and the director of corporate services kind of went rogue, and they've been controlling the municipality and keeping oversight out for years now. I mean, it's been a long thing running. I'm still looking into to what extent and how the former mayor is involved, but Geesie van Deventer's name still comes up a hell of a lot whenever I ask someone about what's going on there now, which it's really, really bizarre. So, but the big scandal that sort of got us looking into this was that bit of leaked audio from 2023, which of course everyone in the municipality would have known about. It's a guy, Alex Kannemeyer, who from all appearances seemed to have been gunning for his superior's position, director of corporate services, because the protocol over there was only a director of corporate services and municipal manager were allowed, and councillors were under no circumstances allowed to talk to any staff or get hold of any information unless they were given it by these two managers. So powerful position in the way things are done. And part of his process was, using harassment, allegedly using harassment and sort of spurious charges to push people out. By his own admission, he was targeting white people because if you have too many white people, then you're not transformed, and it shouldn't be a matter of competence because, well, you can train on the job, like anyone can do this shit, that kind of attitude. Yeah, but I mean, he's been gotten rid of, but they haven't really dealt with the whole cluster of problems associated with that. And there's huge corruption stories that are very difficult to unpick, and unfortunately very complex and legally sensitive. So it might be some time before I can get to write about that. But the thing about Cape Town is and the rest of the DA municipalities is you've got this problem where they don't really provide a great deal of oversight over what's happening inside the civil service. And to the degree that they do, there always tends to be dirty shenanigans. And there's very little accountability for it. But what really irks me is this transformation stuff, because I mean, above and beyond the usual corruption stories, because what's been going on, let's say since 2022, there was a case that CoCT won, challenging the Employment Equity, not Employment Equity Act, Black Economic Empowerment provisions for public procurement. Now, for those of you who don't know, the actual point of enforcement for Black economic empowerment is two things. There are two intervention points that the state has. Number one, they force you to record your labor statistics, your employment, ownership, all of that, right? You have to have a register. You have to have it calculated into a score so that you have a BEE status score, right? That's enforced. You can't lie on that or it's fraud, right? The other one is public procurement. Now, the government is a third of the economy, so it's an enormous player that cuts across almost every sector. And if you want to do business with the state, you have to have BEE status. And what that means is the biggest suppliers in the country are plugged into the state. And in order to do business with them, because this is how BEE scores work, in order to do business with anyone who does business with the state, you're going to also have to have a high BEE score. So this bifurcates the economy between little circular systems outside and BEE systems near the core. And look, BEE can be used as, there's various ways to do fronting or hedging or however you want to talk about it. But essentially, you've got a system where the only way to stop BEE is to stop the policy in public procurement. They can go ahead and if people had to record their BEE status, but nothing else happened after that, it wouldn't matter. No one would bother trying for this. But except for those who have pressure from ESG investors overseas. But the issue is, so they took this to the Constitutional Court, CoCT did, and they won a very interesting victory. Now, it's not like a complete earth-shattering thing from most appearances. It's not like BEE is scrapped. It's not like it's banished. It's not like it's been rendered unconstitutional. But the priority by which you decide which company gets chosen for a particular tender has changed. So there's a constitutional mandate for local government to pursue, and actually any government sphere, to pursue value for money for what they are buying from suppliers or services. And that constitutional mandate was ruled to override the requirements of redress, not redress, of equity, particularly of the quota systems, right? Because those are not specifically mandated in the Constitution. So this creates a little gap where, if you want to be very serious about it, you can just completely deprioritize any form of Black economic empowerment and say, sorry, sure, the competitor has a high BEE score, but this guy who doesn't is offering better value for money. So, sorry. The DA haven't done that. They haven't even tried. And they haven't even announced that they're going to try. That's the thing. And so there's this seeming lack of seriousness with which they take it. They'll say a lot of things about how racial discrimination is bad and, but I don't really believe them. I think that they actually think this can continue forever, and there's no point in trying to do anything about it because, frankly, everyone knows that in order to become a party that's viable within the Black electorate, you have to be plausibly controlled by what is perceived to be Black interests, right? And the DA is very clearly perceived to be for minority interests and primarily for white English-speaking interests. Now, whether those are really in our interests in aggregate are a separate question, but it's about the perception, the
perception of
image.
Yes,
yeah,
sure.
And so that remains the case. And so as a result, we've got this situation where,
and I think part of that perception,
about where we're going. Yeah.
I think part of that perception are people trying to push the DA in a direction, because if the DA think that people think that they support or that they favor white English people, then they're going to move in another direction, in the direction that those
Yeah,
people
they
want.
compensate for it. Yeah, they compensate for it.
Basically,
And
it's
like,
a compensating thing now.
yeah, and there's standard compensation at the moment here in the Cape. Is like they go, oh no, look, we got like 75% of our budget is going to township upgrade. And I'm like, jeepers, like free services for land invaders. Are you kidding me? And you're proud of that? Why? Why?
No, and
It's
it's unfortunate. There's just not a lot of serious people in the DA. There's one or two, but
Oh, no,
they're quite
I disagree.
squishy.
I think there are a number of serious people in the DA. They just don't like their constituents. They think that they're a bunch of backwards, bigoted rubes.
Well, but serious. I mean, they're not serious, and they're not serious the way I would say. So, if someone's a serious person, they would. I mean, for example, the economist Thomas Sowell. He's quite a serious guy. He knows what he's talking about. But I wouldn't say that the DA are serious in that direction.
No.
They're serious in another direction. Oh man, you were saying something. I'll come back to me. It was, anyways.
Yeah, no, I mean, like the statistic that I like sort of raking out recently, since I consulted the general household surveys for the past 20 years, is the massive constant incremental increase of the percentage of the Western Cape population that's staying in informal settlements. So we're the only province that's going backwards in this regard, where the proportion of the population that's living in settlements is increasing. Everyone else, it's decreasing.
Yeah.
And and now we're the worst. We're the worst province in South Africa for
Yeah, they just opened up another one here by me.
Yeah. And the thing is that, all of them are going to get title deeds, and then Tasha Simmons is going to show up and say, look how great we are. Look at how, we're helping people, handing out title deeds to land invaders. Here's some more electricity and water that we're not going to collect the rates on, that we're going to provide all of these people. And it goes on and on and on. And then you wonder why the infrastructure budget keeps ballooning. And I look at this and I think it's insanity, and no one's even trying. I know that there are a fair number of evictions that occur, but the scale of it demands a drastically scaled up operation. I mean, it's not like we're seeing the red ants out every day breaking down shacks. It's a very rare and occasional circumstance, really, that you see actual squatter camp dealt with. And it's not like people don't know when these things are going up. They're just there's not a serious effort. And another thing that speaks to this is their absolute refusal to write legislation that clarifies legal terms in a way that excludes land invaders and trespassers from the rights accorded to lawful tenants. And this is the problem. I mean, everyone complains about the PI Act, and the DA use it as a shield all the time, but they never try to change it. It's right there at their fingertips. I mean, they've been in charge of the provincial 15 years, whatever it is. And when did they actually do anything in that parliament besides passing a budget? It's just the silent testament to their apathy and their acceptance of the status quo.
And we were talking about this before. Is I think there's like a religious element to politics, and there's a religious element to the DA. And for the DA, it's equality. Equality is the religion. So you will see this in so much of the messaging. It's almost like they're worshipping equality. Now,
and it puts them on the back foot because they're the ones who are least extreme about pursuing equality in the country, but like the absolute material equality. So by appealing to that principle, they immediately put themselves on the back foot. So what they're doing is they're telling us, no, we're the reasonable ones. We make things work despite this. But anyone who actually cares about those values is going to at a deep level above issues like social harmony and law and order and safety and functioning infrastructure. If you care about equality more than those things, why would you bother voting for the DA? Because they're not prioritizing it as number one. They're placing it amidst a constellation of values.
And I mean, if I can just speak as a Christian here, I often find it interesting how many Christian people vote for the DA, because I don't really see the DA standing up for many Christian values.
Oh no, they
But
seem dead set against it. I mean, they're very, very, very,
so I
very
think,
progressive. I mean, I remember a few years ago, just before the whole Fishhook High School. So there was the policy that was passed by Debbie Schaefer when she was in charge of the education department here in the Western Cape. And it was like this extremely woke thing with like, trans kids in bathrooms. You got to push trans ideology on the kids as well to make them more accepting of it and so on and so forth. And then,
who
you
was
have
that? Debbie
scary things.
Schaefer.
Sorry?
Who was that? Debbie Schaefer.
Debbie Schaefer, not to be confused with Beverly Schaefer, also of the DA. But Debbie's run off to go work for the NHS in the UK, if I remember correctly.
Oh, interesting.
So but I was speaking to an old DA member from a senior guy who chatted to me on over Twitter in private, and he said to me that because I thought Debbie Schaefer must be this woke nut job, right? So he says to me, no, she's actually a fairly conservative Christian. And I thought, what are you talking about? This is insane. That doesn't make sense. And then he says, no, she just didn't read what she was what she was signing.
Oh my word.
That's the most bananas thing that I've ever heard. I mean, do the DA just? And the thing is, it seems to be a bit of a pattern. There's this whole thing of like, because the party discipline is so rigid, they train everyone up to have this kind of yes man attitude and be terrified of any kind of dissent. So what happens is you get handed a document to sign. You don't even want to look at it because you don't want to develop the internal sort of dissonance that would occur from assenting to something you disagree with. So I can completely understand why Debbie Schaefer would sign that, even if I don't approve of it. But
Sure.
it's miserable because I mean, you get the situation that David Mania is sort of. I mean, you could say he inherited it, but he's been in the party and its machinery since the year dot, so he knows all about what's going on. And the involvement of that, what's that group called? Like that really banal name, like like Diversity for Justice or some nonsense like that. They were going to hold a conference recently.
Yeah, I don't even know if they did, or maybe it's still coming up. I forget.
Yeah, no, I think it was last month. But at any
It's
rate,
still involved.
it was the promotion of the thing. They put the DA Western Cape as put the Western Cape government as a partner, and they put
Yes.
and they
Yes.
put the National Education Department as a partner. And they got very tetchy with me when I asked them about this. The Western Cape Education Department. And then, of course, they issue a statement because I said I tried to hurry them up by saying they've got an hour to respond. I gave them the whole day. They didn't give me any response, and all I wanted was a yes or no. Do you have formal ties with this group?
Mm.
And what they did is they actually called up the group and they said, okay, this NGO that's pushing. It's like the talks about like Robin DiAngelo and all those usual
Yes.
critical race theory people, and they come back and they say, no, we have no ties, and they're going to take down their, the logo that says then
Mm.
we have a formal tie. But they do have formal ties because those groups have been involved and been invited into many, many schools across the Western Cape. And whoever it is in the education department who's opening the door for them shouldn't really have a job, but they haven't been identified. Their job is likely still, secure because we haven't heard anything about it. And that whole Fishhook High School debacle, you might know a little more detail than I do, but that stuff was commissioned by the department.
Yes. Yeah, that was a couple of years back. A good friend of mine's daughter was actually in the seminar. She was actually in the diversity training. She was at Fishhook High School at the time. She matriculated last year, and she came out of that totally traumatized. Her mother said she was in tears. So they literally made the children cry because of the things they were talking about. This is genuine, and this woman's quite tough, and her daughter's quite tough. Like, she's not a weakling. She literally came out in tears. And what's interesting is that the Freedom Front Plus thankfully did a piece on some news site. I forget where. I've got a link to it somewhere. So the Freedom Front stood up and basically said, "This is nonsense. You need to stop this." They called it the Festival of Hate, the Fisher High School Festival of Hate. If you go type it to Google, you'll find it. And
Cheesy, but accurate.
but we got no comment. Well, none that I am aware of from other political parties. And
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, David Mania did the usual thing where he sort of blames his predecessor, but it's like it's not like he's got any more control of the department than anyone else has. He's not taking responsibility for these things. I mean, the same thing happened, but I mean, look at how he handled the recent teachers union strikes. I mean, so what happens is you get teachers union says, well, we don't want to take these pay cuts, and the DA government says, well, we can't afford to give the raise that you want. And they say, okay, well, then we've got to fire a bunch of people. And they say, no, we're not going to take it. And he buckles and comes to some kind of arrangement with them. And I sort of thought to myself, well, this is insane. Because if you really want to cut money, you should do it. And it creates a golden opportunity to improve the department. Because, I mean, if you know the literature to any extent, you'll know that the best thing that you can do for any teaching department is get rid of the worst teachers. And it doesn't even have to be a lot of them. The bottom 5% of performers, the most lazy, abusive, drunken retards, of which we are not in short supply, can be gotten rid of. And it'll massively improve outcomes for students. A slightly bigger class with better teachers is an improvement. I mean, would you rather have, if you have 15 people in a class, but you're being taught by someone who's abusive, absent, disorganized, and unintelligent, then you're harming those kids' futures. And if you're taught by someone who's actually a quality teacher, if the class is maybe up to 30 students, that'll actually be fine. I mean, I like most people, we went through primary schools with 30 or so students in them. That's not unusual. And it does okay. I think the problem is that there's just no sort of metal. There's no guts there.
Yes, no, and I agree with you. And I think we were talking about it earlier that there is a moral system at work here. And because equality has been placed as God, it's literally God, you don't want to question it. You don't want to challenge it because it is the moral virtue, right? And so that, I think, from a theological, psychological perspective, that's at work here. That's often why people don't have the mettle and the conviction to stand up. But if your moral framework is the Judeo-Christian, for example, the 10 Commandments, do not lie, do not cheat, you're able to actually stand up and say no, because your moral framework is not the equality one.
Well, I mean, quite. I mean, look, my sort of contention here would be something slightly simpler, which is that if you concede your opponent's foundational principles, you lose every debate that you're going to have.
If you concede them, explain to it.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, think about so the opposition to any kind of anything that's in the interests of minorities would be the ANC and its splinter parties, right? So that whole movement has a set of values, and the DA consistently concede the foundational principles of that movement as their starting point for everything they do. And so every debate they have in the public sphere,
the Freedom Charter, for example, they totally buy into the Freedom Charter.
Right. And so it's like, you sit there and like when they do win a debate, it's by going, look at us. We are doing the things you want better than you do. And I think, but do we want to be doing these things in the first place? No.
We don't want the Freedom Charter.
Right. So, I mean, I think it's absolutely bananas. But I'm put in mind of that one interview that Helen Ziller did on Biz News a while ago. She said something very peculiar. And I don't know if she misspoke, but it sort of sounds fairly. She said something about the first half of what she said. I thought, yeah, okay, that's fine. But then the second half got weird. So she starts by saying, well, over the last couple of decades, South Africa there are fewer and fewer white spaces in South Africa. And I go, yeah, okay, fair enough. And then she goes, And there are more and more places that are 100% black, and much may go in that direction. I sort of thought to myself, about that. Why is that important? That's really odd. I mean, in the context of other remarks that she's made about how, national identity and everything is rubbish, and mass migration is the future, and everyone's going to become like South Africa, so we have to show that the system can work. This particular viewpoint that she has, including, of course, her perspective that, the free market's actually not a good idea. What you want is a centrally planned economy. This particular, and the way that they set their policy standards by the social development goals of the United Nations, suggests that they have an ideology that's dedicated towards centralized global governance with zero accountability at the local level. Now, that particular model, it's very, very interesting.
And what would be the demographics?
Well, I mean, the demographics of what you mean? I mean,
of such a model.
Well, at a global scale, who knows? I mean, that depends on what migrant flows look like at the end of the day. Because, I mean, if you know these things really well, most migrant flows are dictated by chain migration. And so they'll take on localized characters that are fairly, that vary place to place. But the broad perspective is, okay, we're going to have this multicultural system where there's no common set of values except those dictated from above from the international system. And her remarks on Robin Kabanak and Jonathan Witt's show from 2017, where she goes and says, well, actually, I don't believe in free markets. That's the part of liberalism I don't believe in. I think that the state has a role to play, and everyone is increasingly realizing this, she says. And she goes on to say that we have to direct not only present economic relations, but future ones well into the next generation. So this mode of planning that is adopted by the United Nations, where you plan for the next 30 years at a time, sometimes up to 60 years, this kind of model where the whole trajectory of society has to be managed at a global scale. I mean, this goes into some of the transformations that you're seeing in the Department of Home Affairs and Revenue Services, where Edward Kieswetter and Leon Schreiber have been working together with the private banks to set up a common system of, credit, finance, and identity management under digital ID. So moving towards the cashless society and so on and so forth, right? And it's interesting that everyone's pushing this deadline of 2030 around the world, because what I see happening as we move towards this is also the Bank of International Settlements that controls all of the central banks around the world, except in Russia, North Korea, and Cuba. The common theme over here is a centralized planning of the global economy, right? And it's interesting that Russia becomes the big sort of boogeyman over here. No, I mean, I don't like Russia's government very much, and I'm sort of hesitant to be too kind towards them for a number of ethical reasons as well as pragmatic ones. But I think that I think that it's something that I find fairly sinister, is this sort of constant drive towards global centralization and the eradication of local particularity. Because one of the things that we know very clearly, and it was this thought was stimulated by a comment from Herman Pretorius of the Institute of Race Relations, who, I mean, that organization doesn't regard me very highly, and I have my question marks over their positions as well. But the thing that he said is, like, a race doesn't come into it in politics, come on, really? I mean, the reason that people, and it was around corruption. And so I thought, but, it actually stands to reason that corruption would vary by ethnic group in almost any state, because depending on which ethnic group sees itself as more ethnocentric. So, for example, it's well known in the academic literature that if you have an ethnically diverse society, you get more and more ethnic factional voting. And the more people vote, and another thing that's also known in the literature is that the more people vote according to ethnicity, the less they care about competence or corruption. So ethnocentric parties will be more corrupt. Okay, and we know this as well. So, like, The ANC is very corrupt. The MK is way more corrupt. And the EFF is so corrupt that everything they touch doesn't just turn to shit, but literally explodes. And the thing that we've got over here is a situation where we are a diverse society where people vote very strictly according to which racial bloc they fall into, right? So the minorities vote one way and the majority votes another. And the problem with that is that also within ethnic groups, the level of inequality within that ethnicity, the level of poverty within that ethnicity, and the relative relative amount of academic qualifications and institutionalization, that correlates with corruption as well. So it's natural to expect the black voting bloc, that party bloc, to be more corrupt because of those factors, without any reference to biological arguments whatsoever, purely due to circumstantial and material factors and normal human psychology. You can deduce that race will affect this question. But what is coming out of it is this philosophy from Helen Ziller means that every society must forcibly diversify itself in order to create these circumstances. But this also creates the problem of reduced trust in institutions, difficulty in agreeing on common social norms, social atomization, increased geographic mobility, all kinds of various tensions of etiquette, or what used to be called ordeals of civility.
Atomization is that almost probably everyone in South Africa can understand it, because we have been atomized, and so it's very difficult for us to form some kind of opposition to this strong state, because we're so atomized. How do you even form something that can oppose this centrally planned, top-down authoritarian?
Well, that's part of the thing, is that populism is considered the primary enemy for people who want a technocratic government with distance. Think about what it means how hard it is to contact, let's say, Alan Winde. Everyone knows that even the poorest person, if they put their backs into it for a couple of months, would be able to work up the contact to at least get a message to the guy, right? But getting a message to the president is beyond the reach of all but the tiniest sliver of society. And so the size and scale of your constituency matters a great deal.
No, sure.
Now, when you're dealing with a global constituency, you're dealing with a situation in which influence over policymaking and implementation at the local level is almost zero. Now, Helen Ziller said something very interesting. One of her ways in which she rebutted Cape independence, for example, is she said that, well, we already have a federal society where you can vote for your local government at the provincial level, so we don't need secession. And I thought, yes, but we've had that for 20 years and we've seen decline. Look at the latest economic figures. So for the past 10 years, the Western Cape has grown slightly faster than the rest of the country by 0.1%. That's its average lead on the rest of the country as aggregate. The latest figures came out from Stats SA and said we have slowed down. We are now like third or fourth or fifth, right? And streaking ahead is Limpopo. Limpopo has the greatest growth rate. Now, the DA's PR in the provincial government came out and said, we grow the fastest, according to Stats SA. Well, not this year, we haven't. We've grown maybe the fastest for the past decade, but we slowed down to the point that Limpopo is streaking ahead of us. No, okay. Limpopo is starting from like a lower economic base. That growth doesn't necessarily mean highly competent, complex industries. It means, to a greater extent, sort of a small and local trade, construction, agriculture, a lot of things that are not going to be making people too excited. Some mining endeavors that are productive and lucrative. But what's curious to me is also what sectors are growing in the Western Cape. I mean, the biggest ones are finance and property, construction. So what is actually being made here? What is being done that has lasting value? Finance and property and construction and those things, they're transient. They're transient. And what's more, I mean, the amount of contractors for construction that are coming from outside the country, province, means that, strictly speaking, that a lot of those profits are accruing elsewhere. So I think what we're really dealing with here is it's just everything at every level is just bullshit. There's just no.
Would you agree then?
Hmm.
So I was listening to a podcast the other day. I must actually write something about it, and he was talking about this global state-run system that the Fabian Society are part of, and they're integrated into this. And you've spoken about that.
Hmm.
And then they were talking about how actually superficial and weak the system actually is, and that people can actually oppose it because it's actually so fragile. It's a very fragile system. I must actually do some more work around it, because what you're describing to me is a very fragile system. It's very thin, and that gives movements like our movements a lot of confidence that if we can continue in our trajectory, we could become we can
Yeah,
become
I think I do agree with that in theory, but it's a matter of what you actually observe in practice. And the problem is that people are apathetic. Nobody actually sees a way into dealing with this. And you can even look at the most hardline Afrikaner nationalists. What is their favorite song? De la Rey sal jy die boere kom lei. Oh, please, somebody else deal with the problem, not me. And there are great swathes of the Afrikaner community that are doing extraordinary amounts of work. And I've worked for AfriForum and Solidarity, and they're impressive beyond description. But the ordinary South African, whether you're English speaking or Afrikaner or whatever, is still largely looking to other parties to come and solve this for them. And it's not just that, oh, okay, well, that means that it's fertile ground for someone who's trying to organize. Quite the opposite, in fact. You go up to someone and try and get them to commit to anything that's different from what's already being done, and they look at you like you've got two heads. And it's not just us in the little secessionist movement. It's even, Zulu separatists or, hardline socialists or whatever. I mean, like organizing people to actually do anything that's going to change what's being done is very, very difficult here. I mean, it's a lack of. I think it's also, lack of confidence in the future. But I think the absolute baseline is that everyone has been house trained. Everyone actually thinks, like, oh no, we're not allowed to do that. We don't have permission to do that. We can't do this, that, or the other. And I mean, like, I can see it in myself.
No, that is a good point, but I still do agree that the system that these globalist types are trying to build, it is very thin and it's very fragile. And if we can organize, there is the serious chance that we can take on this fragile system.
Yeah, no, it's a hard thing as well, because you've got these age-old distrusts that are hard to bridge, and
such as
I
between
consider
English and Afrikaans.
Even there. I mean, this is one I find particularly fascinating, because you can be declared against all of the same enemies, and request just a slightly more pragmatic approach, and than what is on offer with your interlocutor, and it becomes very, very difficult to proceed, because it's immediately seen, oh, well, you're not 100% with me. That's because you're harboring duplicity and you want to try and do something else, and you guys are responsible for this, that, and the other. And then I feel like I'm back at university talking to black students about their desires for true socialism and so on, and true decolonization. Because I mean, I remember when I actually believed in that rot when I was a moronic little 22-year-old. And no, I mean, look, regardless of what the substance is, there's a certain kind of conversation.
Weren't you there, like petrol bombing at a jammy bus? I'm sure you were throwing.
No, look, I think the edgiest thing I did at the time was occupying the Bremner building with some of the other students. But I mean, like, the awkward conversations I'd have is like, okay, well, oh, you want to have a leaderless structure, yes, but then you complain about the press maligning you. Why don't we select as a movement, in an open sort of an informal process, someone who's going to be the primary media liaison for the movement? And then they look at me and say, okay, well, we're not going to be dictated to by outsiders. I'm like, are you out of your tree? Like, what is going on here? And it doesn't matter how practical your approach to anything is. You can sit down and have an intellectual conversation with someone and say, okay, well, you want to decolonize, but then what you need to do is actually build up, native language content, and push towards some kind of decentralized approach. And everyone's like, no, that's never going to happen. That's divide and conquer and all of this. Like, it doesn't matter who you're talking to. If you start to inject things that go against people's irrational sentiments, they don't want to do it because it's hard work, and it's, I struggle with this. I mean, you can look at the guys up north in who doing the bitter einde stuff, and they claim swathes of land that they can never control in a million years, and just the most bizarre stuff. I mean, one of the biggest one of the sort of more interesting opposition to Cape independence will be people who still talk about the Free State and the Transvaal as if they're real things. I mean, the demographic change and the territorial shifts are so dramatic that the idea of even considering these as live entities beyond, abstract administrative boundaries of the modern centralized state, it's not realistic. It's gone, right? And what should matter to you is, holding on to your own people and their customs and their cultures and their values and their rituals and their traditions. And this kind of thing falls by the wayside instead of, when people get focused on symbolic victories. I mean, symbolic victories, you can win 100 of those and they won't mean much for the outcomes. This is kind of the thing that we get stuck on in the Cape independence movement. There have been petty disputes over symbolic issues that have no bearing on the practical outcome of the general campaign, and it's been what's holding the movement back for a long time.
And so then moving forward, I know you've spoken about local referendums.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, I mentioned that. I mean, this is something that's been sort of proposed at the moment, but it's something that I can't say a lot about at the moment. So the referendum party has floated the idea of a private referendum at the provincial level, and their model for this is looking at Venice in Italy. So the province of Venezia they ran a private referendum in 2014. They got not enormous turnout, but enough to mean something, and the result was very clearly in their favor. And so the government sort of opened negotiations with the government of that department and said, well, okay, look, we can give you more devolution. You get more of your own taxes back. You can declare more of your own policies in these areas. And so this created a lever by which they could create more autonomy by asking for independence. And so, Phil Craig sort of says, okay, well, that sounds great. Why don't we do that in the Western Cape? Problem is that the investment threshold for running a campaign like that is like 20 million rand. So, and we don't have any billionaires backing us. They're all invested in the status quo, right? They like the DA and the ANC in charge. That's what they want, right? So trying to go for Cape independence, you'd have to make it so that they think they're having to ride the wave that you've made. That's hard. That's hard work. There's a certain escape velocity you have to reach where your activism punches above its monetary weight. We're not there yet. But a thought occurred to me that if we can run this at a local level first, where the budget would be, instead of 20 million, maybe for a single town, it's like 20 to 50K. You do multimedia based. You don't have to, it's not very complicated software wise on the back end. It's very simple. And what we do with that is, well, we run we tally votes against some kind of local issue that's of significance, something that cuts across issues and communities, and addresses people's real grievances, and use that as a means for negotiating and lobbying the local administration, wherever it is, for changes in that regard. And you use that as a model to move forward. Now,
do you know
that's the proposal phase. So, I mean, I have to be very circumspect in how I talk about this, really.
But I mean, we've known about referendums for years. It's not like it's a new idea. This is not a new idea. I mean, people have been, and I mean, even the like party name, the referendum.
The ancient
party.
Roman plebiscite,
Yeah.
yes, but
So,
but it's more about, can we really get it off the ground?
down where
it's too early to say. I'll probably know in a couple of weeks whether or not it's something that can actually happen.
Sure, of course.
But
down where I live,
until then, I don't want to get people's hopes up too soon.
But it's good to talk about the idea of a referendum. I mean, that's what we're about. Is a new way of doing politics where a bunch of people hold a referendum and they say to the government, "We want you to do X, Y, Z."
It's legal status. Its legal status will be equivalent to a petition, but if you can get a coverage for that petition, in a specific form, the form of a referendum, then it changes substantially the political weight behind it, because you can say this percentage of the local population has participated.
Yes.
These are their views for and against the proposition, and here's what you're going to do about it now that we have this clout or this outcome. So,
and down where I live, there's a massive group of people that are basically, I know of a WhatsApp group with well over 600. Now, it's a much larger network. And know that where I live, there's only like a couple thousand people, so there's a huge amount. But they basically have an issue with the city of Cape Town spraying chemicals on the streets because it kills the plants.
Oh, shit. You know what I did about that? I just asked them to stop doing it. Like we used to have every Tuesday when I moved back to my family house. We had like a team of 3 or 4 sort of guys walking around spraying weed killer on my fucking plant. I was wondering why my garden was like the plants on that one side were looking dead as hell. And they've recovered now because no one's gone by to do it for like a couple of years. But I had to, like for 3 or 4 weeks in a row, I had to get in their way and say, stop that, go away. You're not spraying my bloody verge.
No, sure, I do that as well. But it would be these people really want something, and I've spoken to them, and the city of Cape Town are not answering them. So they would vote for a referendum for that.
I imagine the trouble is like the size. I mean, like you have to have some kind of pilot population to start off with, and calculating the costs per resident, it's like R1 or R2 a resident, which doesn't sound much, but people don't tend to chip in very much, and so it's always hard to get the ball rolling. You have to get like a couple of big donations to get this running, and then you have to, and then it's multimedia as well. So you have to go through social media, you have to go through phones, you have to go through all kinds of things, and then you have to cross-reference people's contacts so you don't have duplicates. And it's a lot of legwork, and even for a small community. So I think the idea that this is a trivial thing that can just be floated overnight it's not realistic. But I think if people that I've been talking to can put their backs into it, we should be able to see it in 3 to 6 months, with any luck. But that's me being nice and optimistic. And if that goes ahead, the next one will be much quicker, because then you already have a model, you already have people, organizations and instruments you contract with and work with, and then it can become duplicated across the province on a variety of issues, from land reform
and the whole country. All over.
Yeah, exactly.
Up in Pretoria, Zululand.
Yeah. And I mean, this would change things a lot, because one of the prevailing issues in all democracies is that people don't want people want certain things from their elected officials, but overall, there's absolutely zero relationship between the population's policy preferences and the actual policy outcomes in Western democracies, the ones that aren't supposed to be the most responsive. And so this is kind of where you get that whole issue of populism coming in. When you have populism is democracy in spirit. Now, I have my objections to democracy in principle, but the idea that it can be disregarded as a necessary input into how society is run, I think that's unreasonable. And so for me, I'm a pragmatist on this. To be all sort of twee and academic, I mean, the one philosopher I think still has any kind of political import today is still Aristotle, and he says there's three ways of doing government: it's rule by one, rule by a few, and rule by the many. Right? So that's monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy. Although it gets more complicated than that, but basically that's the kind of idea. So you can have like a dictatorship, you can have an oligarchy, and you can have a democracy. And democracy can quickly become mob rule because people are stupid. Let's be frank, everywhere in the world, most people are kind of dumb, and they want things that are not necessarily in their interest, or maybe they are in their interest, but they're not in the other guy's interest, three wolves and a sheep voting on what's to have for dinner. That kind of.
Yeah, and so referendum is a great way of actually working out democracy in a way that's actually productive.
Yes, but it's one of those things where it depends on who's running it, and so you get a first mover advantage by becoming the first person to try it. So that's the idea. So
okay. I think, dude, that was excellent. Before we end off, is there anything else important?
No, I mean, look, there's a brief mention I wanted to make about Natim Tetwa, because look, that story, I think that's attracted a lot of attention. A lot of people are making sort of conspiratorial speculations. I don't think it's worth going into those, because it's one of those things you'll never know. And I mean, much like with 9/11, now I actually think this is worth going into briefly for a minute or two. Is when people talk about conspiracy theories, they get distracted by method and forget about agency. So, for example, you don't need the buildings to be a controlled demolition for it to be an inside job for 9/11, right? If you think practically speaking, right? Just in the abstract as an illustrative example. And for the same reason, when you look at Natim Tetwa's suicide, you don't need the actual suicide itself to have been a conspiracy where he didn't really kill himself for it to be a consequence of a conspiracy of the same design. So someone could have called him up and say, these consequences will occur if you don't take yourself out of the picture. That's not unrealistic for South Africa. So, but rather than speculate too much about this, I thought it was I thought when I wrote the obituary for the guy, I thought to myself, well, yeah, I thought, instead of just sitting there and going, oh, hello, sunshine. Hello, is je wakker? Is je wakker? Hello, ma. Okay, so we've got the little ones up. I have to wrap up very soon.
Yeah, me as well.
Yeah, but no, when I wrote about
monsters,
yeah, when I wrote about Natim Tetwa, I sort of pointed out that I moved from the assumption that he did kill himself, because what's the point otherwise? And I thought to myself, well, no one else in the ANC has ever demonstrated they feel enough weight on their conscience to do anything like this, right? And I thought that was a remarkable thing to observe. I mean, this is a guy who's been involved at the highest level of politics for 20 years. He's worked across the administrations. He's been complicit in the Marikana massacre. He was complicit in all kinds of corrupt schemes across Zuma and Ramaphosa's administration. And it's interesting that he's the one who took it on the chin, because no one else ever seemed to. And in a way, I felt extremely sad. Strange, I mean, but it was hard to avoid feeling some degree of sympathy for the man. And as venal and corrupt as he was, if you have any familiarity with those thoughts, that's from some particular point in your life, or you've known someone who went down that path or whatever, it's not something you'd wish on your worst enemy. So I sort of look at that and I feel an extraordinary sense of pity for the man, that he'd allowed himself to get into the position where he didn't feel there was any other way out, and hopefully that's not going to be a position the rest of the country will find themselves in. hopefully we can find a peaceable way to exit the building, so to speak.
No, sure. I mean, the like guilt and the like weight of guilt on your conscience can be very strong, and that's definitely not the way I would want it to be dealt with. And no, I agree with you. It is a very sad story. Yeah. Okay, dude. Well, thanks so much for this news update for the week. I look forward to next week.
Yeah. Well, all right. Cheers, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.